In today's live advanced lesson, I'm going to teach you how you can create 100 plus offers for both cash and subject to for all of the MLS properties that are currently listed that you're looking to either wholesale for an opportunity or to acquire as an investor. So, we are going to automate this process by using the Jericho software, and I'm going to teach you step by step on how we can underwrite 100 plus offers all within a couple of minutes and then email blast these LOIs to either the seller or to the agent. Let's get started. All right, so in order to maximize our time and efficiency when we're targeting properties on the MLS that would be considered a good subject to candidate, we're going to need access to a real estate tool that will allow us, as the wholesaler or the investor, to access a particular data point, such as the total encumbrance, so that we know if the property itself is in a situation where it has low equity or if it has a fair amount of equity. And because a subject to candidate, a subject to property has low equity, the only way you're really going to know if that property does have very low equity is if we know the total encumbrance. So we're going to get access to that data point for all of our specified properties using a real estate tool named Propstream. Now, if you don't have access to Propstream, you can head on over to Propstream's main website and you'll have access to a 7-day free trial. Now, after the 7-day free trial ends, I believe the pricing on Propstream is $99 a month, but you can skip that entirely by just heading on over to the link in the video description below of today's lesson. You'll be greeted by my homepage, where then you can go here on the top right hand side, click on Propstream Investor Access, and you will be able to acquire Propstream for a fairly large discount. Now, I'm not affiliated with any of the services provided here from Propstream. This is coming from my partner, Equity Empire Solutions. And so you'll have access to Propstream for a fairly large discount if you do intend on using it further. And before we get started in going through the filtration process in Propstream, let's take a quick look at what today's mortgage rates are. And we can see here that interest rates as of right now are anywhere between 6 and 7%, but it looks like it might be more close to 7% interest rate, which is fairly high for a 30-year fixed loan. So there is a huge benefit to acquiring a property through a subject to, especially if you are a retail buyer, because now you don't need to assume the loan. There is no assumption involved, which means no lender approval and no credit check. You're simply going to take over the existing loan, which means that you need to have a conversation with the seller and the agent and explain to them why you are qualified to take over the existing loan. But if you do get through that process of reassuring your credibility, now you can have a property with half of today's interest rates. So you might be lucky enough to acquire a property at 2.5, 3, or even 3.5% interest rate compared to what today's market rates are for a 30-year or a 15-year fixed loan. So let's go back into PropStream. And one of the mistakes that wholesalers do is they tend to filter property on PropStream based off of the city or the town, and we don't want to do that. So whether you're a wholesaler or an investor, you want to keep the filtration process on PropStream at a minimal, because then we're going to export the necessary data points that we do need into the Jericho software. And at that point, it'll be about another 3 to 5 minutes in which we are just going to briefly filter through the data that we want to target for our LOIs. And the reason why we're going to keep the filtration process at a minimal on PropStream is because if you over filter on PropStream, then you're going to be missing out on properties that would indeed fall under a subject to candidate, meaning that it might be a good opportunity to acquire that property as a subject to, but because you over filtered your settings on the PropStream filtration setting, you are not going to see that property. So we're going to keep the filtration process at a minimum, and you're going to see me step by step as to which settings that I personally use to export that data, and then we'll analyze that as a CSV file through the Jericho software. So this is my buy box criteria. These are the 4 states that I personally target, and these are the counties that I am interested in either doing a wholesale deal or even acquiring the property myself. So step number 1 is knowing your market. You need to know your market, and you need to know which counties that you want to target. Now we're specifying the search on Propstream by county because if we filter by county, we'll get a very large data set of properties that fall under that county, because a county is much larger than a town, and that's exactly what. So in this live example, I'm going to do, let's do Cobb, and I'm going to put that in for Georgia. And you'll see here that it just auto-populated, so it's under Cobb County. We have 271,000 properties that are either on market or off market that are being provided for us through Propstream. So we're going to go into the filtration process here, and we're going to go step by step into filtering this list for subject to candidates. So what I like to do is I like to target 3-bedroom and 2-bath, because this is the most diverse type of property, and these types of properties have the most functionality. The building size, I prefer 1,000 square feet or above. The year built, I prefer 1970 and up. Now, why do I use the year built as 1970 and higher? Because we are currently in the year 2025, and I don't like dealing with properties that are greater than 60 years old. They tend to have issues. Unless I'm specifically targeting a property that would make a good candidate for a fix and flip, then I don't mind what the year built is. But for subject to, because there's already low equity to begin with on that property, we really want to keep the rehab costs at a minimal, because if we end up over rehabbing on the property itself, we don't have any equity to begin with on that specified property. So it's not in our best interest as a investor to rehab extensively on a property where you know that it doesn't really have any equity to begin with. The association, HOA, pool, garage, basement, attic, we're going to keep that as any. I'm not going to touch any of those filtration settings. That is totally fine. Now, since we are targeting MLS properties, we're going to make sure that's set to any. Listing type, any. MLS status, I want everything. And why do I want everything? Because I want to target all of the properties that have been listed on the MLS that have either expired, have been withdrawn, have failed, or are currently contingent or pending. I don't even care if the property was sold, because there's a good possibility that that homeowner may have purchased that property and now is wanting to sell the property again. And how are they going to sell that property if they don't have any equity? Well, that's where 2 offer would come in. The MLS status date, the days on market, doesn't matter to me. Keep it at a minimal. Listed below market price, any is fine. The MLS listing amount, there are certain investors that like to stay below $1 million or even $500,000 in terms of what the price of the property might be in terms of ARV or even the list price. It really doesn't matter what the current MLS listing amount is, because let's say, for example, is listed for $800,000, but it has a total encumbrance of $760,000. Well, that means there's only $40,000 of gross equity. And with $40,000 of gross equity, it's barely going to give any type of profit to the seller once that property is sold. So it would actually be in the best interest of the seller to consider a subject to offer, because they might be able to walk away with more money in pocket. And it'd be great as an investor, because now you could bring $40,000 to the closing table, cover the gross equity that the seller does have, which in this case is the $40,000. And with $40,000, you've just acquired a property that was currently listed at $800,000. So that is the power of a subject to offer. You can acquire properties with very little capital up front. For pre-foreclosure and bank owned, that does not matter at all. So we're going to skip that because we're not targeting pre-foreclosure or bank-owned properties. Years of ownership. This is important. Now, for years of ownership, wholesalers tend to stick with 2, maybe 3 years of maximum ownership because we know that if the property has less time to appreciate in value, there's a greater likelihood that that property has low equity. But we're not going to do 2 years or 3 years as the maximum years of ownership. We're going to do 5. And we're going to do 5 because we're going to export this data as a CSV file into the Jericho software. And when we do so, we'll have a fairly large list of properties that we can then filter out ourselves and see if it is a good candidate for a subject to, despite the years of ownership. Again, we don't want to overfilter these settings on Propstream. Now, for the owner type, I do want to stick with individuals. I don't want to deal with LLCs or any other mixed ownership. Just stick with ownerships that are individually owned by real people and not entities. Last sales price doesn't matter. Last sales date doesn't matter. We don't need to touch those settings. Liens, bankruptcy, divorce, we'll keep that as any. Now, in terms of estimated equity, we're going to put in a maximum of estimated equity of 97%. Now, why am I putting 97% maximum equity? Because I want to have a cutoff so that PropStream knows that I'm not interested in any type of seller finance. I don't want to target properties that have 100% equity because we're targeting properties that are low equity for subject to. So we do need to specify a cutoff in terms of estimated equity. And so our list will not have any free and clear properties. So the cutoff that seems to work fairly well within PropStream is 97. For the mortgage info, the number of open mortgages, we're going to keep that as 1. You have the ability to put in 2 or 3 open mortgages. I really wouldn't do that. You're going to overcomplicate the underwriting process, and the more loans or liens that are associated with the property, the greater likelihood that that property is just not going to cash flow once you have a tenant inside the property. In most cases, you're doing a traditional LTR. Sometimes you'll do a wrap or a lease option. Bottom line, stick to 1 open mortgage on that specified property. If you see 2 open loans on a property, it does not mean it's going to kill the deal, but you will really need to make sure that that property can indeed cash. For loan type, we're going to click on conventional, we're going to click on FHA, we're going to click on VA. Credit line is reverse mortgage, commercial, and construction. We're going to keep this on. So these are the loan types that we want to. Now, in terms of the interest rate on the mortgage, you'll see that wholesalers will target the property itself for maybe, let's say, 5 or even 4% interest on the loan or less, meaning that they're looking for a property that has a fairly low interest rate compared to today's market value, which you saw initially. But that's not a good idea to include that in the filtration process for PropStream. Instead, keep this blank. And we want to focus on properties that do indeed have low equity. And here's why we don't care about the interest rate. Because the first conversation that you need to have with a seller or an agent is see if they're even open-minded to a subject to offer. If they're not open-minded to a subject to offer, you're wasting your time up front looking for specified properties that fall under a specified interest rate. So the interest rate does not matter. What we care about is whether or not the property has low equity to begin with, and then we're going to create an offer and send out that LOI to the seller and find out what the motivation is. Are they motivated enough to take a cash offer? Are they motivated enough to consider a subject to offer? And if they are motivated enough to take a subject to offer, then at that point in time is then where you would kindly ask the seller for a recent copy of the mortgage statement so that you can verify what the monthly payment is to the lender and what their interest is on the. But until you have that conversation with the seller or agent for a subject to offer, there is no need to filter excessively on PropStream for a specified interest. Now, in terms of interest rate types, we're going to keep unchecked. We really want everything. So we can do all the interest rates. It does not matter what the interest rate type is because we don't want to overfilter anything through the PropStream database here. What we want to do instead is we want to find all the properties that would make a good subject to candidate, create an LOI, present the LOI, and get feedback from the seller or agent and have a discussion of taking over the existing loan through a subject to acquisition. That is the mindset that most wholesalers are missing. Don't overcomplicate the process by over on the Propstream data. So now we've completed the filtration process for Propstream. So let's review this again, and then we'll head on over to step number. So for property details, we're going to make sure that we're targeting a 3-2 property unit. We're going to be targeting residential properties, so make sure this is selected as the minimum square feet of the property is going to be 1,000 square feet minimum. Minimum year built 19. On market could be on market, could not be on market. The listing type could be for sale or for rent. Yes, it's okay to target properties that are for rent because what we're trying to do is find motivation from that seller. Even if the property is listed, they might actually be bleeding on the cash flow, and you're not going to know that as a wholesaler or an investor until you make an offer and present it to them and have a conversation with the seller and agent about their listed below market price. Could be any pre-foreclosure and bank owned. I wouldn't even touch that. Just leave that as ownership information. Owner occupied could be any. Vacancy could be any. Years of ownership, I'd say 5 is a decent maximum years of ownership. We don't want to over filter on this particular setting. As stated before, a lot of wholesalers will target years of ownership for maximum of 2 or 3 years. Don't do that. That's not advised. You don't want to be missing out on properties that would indeed fall under a good subject opportunity. Owner type, I'd stick to individual because we don't want to be dealing with any type of entities or corporate companies such as hedge. Probate is totally fine, so you can keep that as N. You're going to put a maximum cutoff on the property equity at 97% because we want to stay clear of any free and clear properties as we are targeting subject to and we're not targeting any type of seller fine. Number of open mortgages, we'll set that to loan type. We're going to be targeting conventional, FHA, VA, credit lines, the other, and the unknown data type. Reverse mortgage and commercial and construction loans, we're going to stay clear of. Interest rate, don't put in an interest because we don't want to overfilter the Propstream. And now you can see here that you have the interest rate types. Just click on select all so that Propstream knows that you're not going to exclude any data set. And so the filtration here now on Propstream is finished. So we started with, I think it was around 260,000 properties initially. And now we're at 2,000 unique properties that fit our search criteria. So we're now going to select this information from Propstream, or we're going to create a list, and we're going to create a new marketing list. And I'm going to put in today's date, and we're now going to click save. So now we'll head on over to the My Properties. So after your list has been saved, you're going to head on over to your marketing list. And once you've found your list that you just created, you're then going to select all from the properties and you're going to click on this wheel icon and we're going to start deselecting the data points that are going to be exported as a CSV file. Now, we are indeed going to deselect and we're going to also select certain data points because there are certain data points here that are irrelevant that we really don't need. And there's going to be a few data points that we do need when we are auto underwriting our cash and subject to offers for these properties. So the address is already selected here for us. It's a default setting. So we're going to deselect the unit number, deselect city, deselect state, and deselect zip. We can deselect all of these, including the county, because we already know what county we had searched in, since that was our initial search that we had done on Propstream, and we obviously know what state that we're working into. So we'll just name the file as that particular county and state. So for example, I would name this Cobb County, Georgia, since that was my initial search that I had done. We're also going to get rid of the APN. We don't need that. Owner occupied, owner first name, a lot of defaulted settings here that are already checked off. We don't need any of these when we're doing the auto underwriting for a subject to. We're going to keep the process very simple. So I'm going to deselect all of property characteristics. Property type really isn't needed, but we're going to keep it anyways, just so we are aware if whether or not we're working with a single family, a mobile home. It's always good to know that. The rest of these settings here, we're going to deselect. So the only one that is selected is the property type. Total assessed value is not needed. We can deselect this. The last recording date, deselect. Last sales amount, open loan. Now this is important. We need the loan one balance. We also need the loan one rate. The type of loan and the lender is not needed, but it would be a good point of reference to know what the loan one balance is and the loan one rate, because we're going to need these data points when we're doing the auto underwrite for subject to. Total open loans, we want this because we want to compare the total one balance with the total open loans, and we want to verify that Propstream did indeed export the data correctly and that there isn't any type of nuances within the data. So we're going to know what the total encumbrances of the property by simply comparing the total open one balance with the loan one balance. So we'll keep this one. Everything else here can get unchecked. MLS status, I want to know what the status of the listing is. MLS date, definitely need this. MLS amount, MLS agent name, MLS agent phone number, MLS agent email, and the broker. These settings we definitely want when we're exporting. The lien amount is not necessary, so we can deselect it. Pre-foreclosure, we don't need this setting. Marketing, we can deselect that. We're going to click on now apply. You can also save this setting as a new layout. I already have this saved, so I don't need to click on apply and save, but you can save it here. And we're going to apply these settings. And now that we have all of our properties here checked off for Cobb County, Georgia, we're going to click on the Actions tab, and we're going to click on Export CSV. And now we can see here that we had 1,107 properties exported. So that is a huge data set, a lot of opportunity to create a subject to offer and even possibly further a hybrid offer depending on the property. So once that file has finished downloading, you're going to want it to save it into a corresponding folder. And so for me, I have it in a specified folder here named Exported Properties. I'm going to rename this file now as Cobb County, Georgia. Once your file has been renamed, you can click on it and you can see here on your screen that these data points are going to be the data points that we're going to be working with. We really don't need a large data set when we're trying to auto underwrite these properties. We really only need the essential. And so I'm going to show you how you now, the next step, which is going to import this data into the Jericho software. And I actually have a additional CSV file here for Barrow County, Georgia. So I think what I might actually do here is I'll incorporate this data set with the other data set, and we'll combine both data sets together. That way we can maximize the amount of offers that are being sent out for cash and subject to. So we're actually going to combine these data sets for demonstration purposes. And this will be automated for us through the import feature on the Jericho. So that is going to be step number 3.